Hey, hope everybody's had a good painting week. We're back with a question from R. I don't know if you read comments, but where did you get your wood palette and how did you seal it? I sealed mine with linseed oil mixed with liquid, and I noticed it just takes forever to wipe away stained color when cleaning. Well, there's the classic question, isn't it? We finally come up with the question of all questions. Thank you, R. I remember having all kinds of interesting advice at the Art Students League from every other student. They would all give you their 2 cents worth, and that just kept happening throughout my training, and even when I'm teaching, I hear students telling each other how to take care of a palette. Most of them want miracles out of a palette, things that can't happen, like R. That if you use pigments on the surface that's relatively porous, you can do it without getting stains. But yeah, we've all tried one of the things that was classic, and I'll show you somebody's outdoor palette. But I'll show you a sort of a general look. This is a Luan, presumably about a more than an eighth-inch thick palette, and these are just cut out of those plywood. That plywood. By the way, just for the answer to that first part of your question, where'd you get your wood palette? The one you saw online before, and whatever show that was this palette here, which was, it's going to be hard for me to show you this, but it's ostensibly cut from a Sargent palette, and but I've seen so many different palettes attributed to Sargent. I think that's just the thing to do, to attribute a palette to Sargent. But and that also gives you some idea what the surface was like on that. This is a pretty messy surface. I was very surprised that anybody thought to think it was a good thing, but it's not a bad thing either, by the way. So so the palette shape and all that sort of thing, you get used to those. I find that one also cut out of the same thickness plywood with a hardwood face on it. That one's a very light material, by the way, and you see how dark it is, but you see originally it was a really light material, much lighter than the other one, and not typical. I don't know what it was surfaced with, and I don't know that it was the Luan thing that you see in the hardware or the lumber stores. But this one definitely has that feeling, that fine graininess of mahogany, and it's a perfectly nice surface once you get it thickened up. So one of the things we do is we always we always seal the back, but it's just a couple layers of oil, well rubbed in. I usually use a little bit of Terps to help it soak in that first layer or two. Just rub it, let it dry a little bit, and then rub it again. It won't really dry. You don't really want it to dry. You don't want a skin on it. But that gets you a surface. The board will tend not to warp if you do that, and close the ends as well, seal the ends. And then depending on how you want to start, and I typically do want to start with a slightly darker palette. So you can see I set a tone, this one right here. The value of that palette was that originally. So you can see it's significantly darker. This one here hasn't been cared for, though, in the way you would really want to. There's spots of paint still sitting on here. I think that's a result of being outdoors and then having, having rushes and having to run this place and that place and forgetting a palette in your easel or something like that. But it's like you have good excuses for doing things like that. But no, so I can just tell you what we do, and in the class of classically there, say for what it's worth. But what I simply found is that because you're going to stain it anyway, just accept that each time you scrape your paint off the palette, which most of my students do every time, and yet I don't prefer to scrape them off, but the first several times I do. And but I don't try to take away the stain of the spots because I like them to be there, right? I like the white to be right in the middle of this edge here. And then I put the colors in the same way all the time. That's my arrangement. So what I do is I just put those down, scrape them off, but the rest of the palette here, I just take whatever color I like. I just scrape away the colors that I don't think will mix that color. And this one, being outdoors, is taking on a greenish thing, and I think it was being used for something else. This is actually an umber kind of a stain on it right now. So, so what I do every time I do it is I just scrape off most of the colors, clean up most of those, and then I use whatever's left and I restain. So you just assume me at your will. I just do it with terps, though. I just make sure in fact, even the first stain I put down, it isn't a stain like you'd buy at the store. It's a stain made out of these colors. And I just rub it into the surface. After that first layer or two of oils, I just start rubbing this into the surface and let it dry pretty well. But nevertheless, nothing's perfect about any of that stuff. And I just sort of keep up with the surface just a little bit by using whatever colors I already have in my palette to restain it and reinvent that color again to whatever extent I can. If you mix, for example, if you want it to be sort of a warm color, then I prefer that indoors. I prefer the more neutral tones, the tendency of the palette to go green outdoors, and I like that better. But so outdoors, I might allow whatever last color I use to stain it with to be, and you can't fight it anyway. It's going to be sort of cooler, and I allow that to be there, and I just make sure it's evenly spread. And use terps then, and wipe away off with terps. The funny thing about what I've found is that you don't need oil of the surface again. The terps and the oil that's in the pigments is going to be tons to get you a nice lustrous, non-porous surface. And it happens pretty quickly. So those are my best suggestions to you. Do both sides of the palette initially with the oil and terps. Rub it in well, let it dry, do a couple layers. Now on this layer here, begin to add some pigments and do it a couple more times, just rubbing it off mostly completely, and just make a nice even surface of the color you think you like. Maybe you've seen one somewhere. And then just accept that it will change over time, and you won't change it much, but just accept that what you're going to do then is you're going to go ahead and use whatever pigments are left on your palette to recreate your stain, bring it back to what you like as you clean it with terps. So that's just me, and but I used to do all these careful things you sound like you're doing when you first start these things. You want this perfect way of working. The only thing I am proud of some significant numbers of my students for is go ahead, clean the whole palette, and leave these piles. You recreate these piles. What they do is they clean the whole thing. They put the pigments over there for a while they clean this surface, and then they set the pigments back into this side again where they're going to work, and you never get this massive buildup. Which is half the charm, of course, that massive buildup on there, isn't it? What good painter have you ever seen that has a clean surface? You probably have. Somebody will probably tell me there has been one that they've seen. So, yeah, that's all I do at this point right now. I don't do any of the other things that you read about in books that other people have told you. And I make no attempt to preserve that. I'll add one last thing. To preserve whatever the original one was, per se. But I'd one last thing, and that is you get to some troubles like these spots on here that you really wish you hadn't, and you want it more even. It's not a bit of a problem in taking a paint cleaner, a paint remover, to the entire surface. I just find that if you just rub that stuff on barely, and take it off almost immediately, and do that several times, you can get right back to an even surface. And from that point, and it will become, if you do it deep enough, it'll become more porous, but it'll come right back to what you want again in the next couple cleanings. So that is one other thing you might consider. All right, so there we are. That's the grand story of the day. Maybe this is the shortest video of the year. So isn't everybody happy? Oh, don't forget to subscribe if you found this worthwhile, or even if you didn't. And do share, make comments, and thank you again, all of you, for the donations. I understand that the Tom Dunley interview is coming up quite soon. I'm thinking maybe in the next week. So for all of those of you who made that possible, again, thanks, and look for it one of these days soon. All right, next time.